I'm beginning to wonder if these gifts have any bloody meaning at all.
Let's talk about Shogun Episode 7, A Stick of Time. Before we get into this episode, I want to mention an email and some messages and emails we've gotten about last week's conversation about Shogun Episode 6. You can always write into us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Of course, find Decoding TV across all podcast platforms. And Lewis writes in about our conversation about Toranaga. We talked about how Toranaga, not the greatest person with people skills last week, right? And last week, there was a scene where Toranaga is holding court and speaking with Buntaro about his drunken disruption at Blackthorns. Lewis writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. Toranaga knows exactly what's going on between the three of them, and he's manipulating them into getting it out of their systems. He orders Buntaro to isolate himself from Mariko for 7 days, thus freeing up Blackthorn and Mariko and allowing Buntaro to self-reflect and cool off. He then orders Blackthorn to get laid by a courtesan, basically forcing a rebound from Mariko and causing a potential rift between Blackthorn and Mariko. He then orders Mariko to attend the courtesan appointment, forcing her to face her issue and make a decision to either 1, get over Blackthorn and go about her business and put her house in order, or 2, use the privacy afforded to lock in Blackthorn as a lover and then focus the energy on keeping the peace. Both of these options are useful and valid to Toranaga, and knowing that emotions will likely be high, he gave her time to organize and focus after whatever he decides by forcing the 7 days of isolation from Buntaro. Genius! You say this man knows little about the matters of the heart, but I say he understands more than most, end quote. We got a few messages about that, a few comments on YouTube about that, but that was a good summation. I think, I understood that was a possible interpretation of events, but regardless, the plan did not work. That was the point. That was the point I was trying to make. Is like whatever his plan was, it did not work. It was a bad plan, in my opinion. It wasn't the worst idea he could have come up with, but I would be shocked if you watched this week's episode and said, "Hey, it looks like that plan resolved all the problems last week." Right?
Yeah, it seemed more like, well, that is a plan, and then he gets a grumpy face on and shoos them away. It's like, it's more, this gets you out of my face for some indiscriminate amount of time. Maybe it solves it, but you know what solves the problem right now? Is you going the fuck away and leaving these problems out of my doorstep. Do you see what else I'm dealing with?
I think that people were objecting to the fact that we didn't give Toranaga's plan the full airing that it deserved last week.
I think you need to see the consequences of that plan before you can necessarily.
Well, but he's like, okay, stay away from your wife, and then you guys fuck, and it's like, no, like that's clearly.
Well, I don't want to leap back too far into this episode, but I think we're getting more evidence that Toranaga, the mastermind, more myth than fact.
So it's fair that we might not have fully articulated the intricacies of Toranaga's plan last week, but I think we captured the efficacy of it. And I will leave it at that. But thank you for all the emails at decodingtv@gmail.com and for your comments at youtube.com/@decodingtv. We appreciate them and we're reading them, and it's fun to interact with people and talk about the show. Shogun Episode 7, A Stick in Time. Patrick Klepek, let's start by talking about overall thoughts on this episode. What do you think? Good episode?
Yeah, I thought this was a tremendous episode as being I think maybe a takedown is the wrong word, but it is there are lots of characters, but it is a Toranaga specific centric episode exploring someone whose interiority we have very little understanding of. And I think even at the end of this episode, still have many questions about who this person is, what drives them, how calculating are they relative to the version of themselves they present to the world that comes across as very calculating. It's very much a episode about presentation, about myth, about storytelling, both in terms of the long-term, like legacy, and also the people in front of you. Just a fascinating sort of like tour de force from an acting perspective, just like tons of great performances across the board. And as a setup for the, like, where this is all going, just you're in knots the entire time. And I love the fact that once again, I've gotten to the end and I have no idea like where this is going next. I've accidentally read titles of like episodes, so I have some sense of like, okay, But here's what I'll say. I try to work backwards from that, and I'm like, you know what I mean? And so I think that's such a wonderful place to end up in this show is I'm now getting sad at how little time is going to be left with these characters. And so every scene feels a little more precious. And even when this show slows to a glacial pace, it's done so with such delightful intent that I'm just excited at whatever speed the show wants to go because it's done with such intentionality. And so I think a really wonderful sort of slow interiority episode before I think we are about to enter into like much heavier, bumpier straits going forward.
I thought this was also a great episode. This is an episode about myth and legends and the stories we tell ourselves and what happens when those myths and legends are pierced. And I thought overall very solid, and obviously also falls into line with the Shogun winning formula, which is 95% people sitting around in rooms talking and then shocking act of violence. That is more episodes than not have had that formula, and this adheres to that.
Again.
They got me again. They got me
again. And I was coughing.
You knew. I had said it 3 times before on the podcast. You knew it was going to happen, and then it still surprised you, Patrick Klepek. But I thought this is a very solid episode and a lot to dive into. So let's get into what actually happens. We're going to spoil the episode starting now. We begin with a flashback. It's Toranaga's first battle from 46 years ago, and he is a bebe. Patrick Klepek. He is like I think he's 12 years old.
Shockingly young. Like I got the sense that we're going to get a young Toranaga, but I was figuring early 20s.
Yeah, I thought he'd be like an adult, but apparently he led people into battle. I don't know who put him in charge of an army, but whatever. We don't see the details. He has defeated someone named Mizoguchi who agrees to commit seppuku, and he asks Toranaga to be his second, which is basically the guy who stands behind someone committing seppuku. I looked this up from history.com. Quote, seppuku is a form of ritual suicide that originated with Japan's ancient samurai warrior class. The grisly act typically involves stabbing oneself in the belly with a short sword, slicing open the stomach, and then turning the blade upward to ensure a fatal wound. Some practitioners of seppuku allowed themselves to die slowly, but they usually enlisted the help of a kaishakunin, or second, who would lop off their head with a katana as soon as they made their initial cut. The entire process was accompanied by great ceremony. Among other rituals, the doomed individual often drank sake and composed a short death poem before taking up the blade. End quote. So that's what the second is. Again, another instance of the show just not explaining anything to you and just being like, we're going to immerse you straight into this world.
I think at some point, David, maybe as we approach the finale, we can rank preferable ways to die in the world of Shogun. We've seen many of them. I got to admit, I think boiling in the water, that's the least. I don't want to do that. I think that still remains number one. But at a certain point, the ways that people die in this show, you start wondering, like, all right, so if I was here, which one? Which one? This one doesn't seem great. I don't know if I could get that knife in there. Sword in there, rather.
Well, that's the beauty of having a second, Patrick Klepek.
That's true. You just got to just get it in. Just
get the knife in, and then it's like you don't have really that much more to worry about, unless, of course, your second is a 12-year-old boy who
can't wax at the tree,
who might not be able to cut your head off with one.
Do you think the first one kills him? Like?
No, he's probably alive during that whole thing. It's probably bad. So, anyway. We don't see the killing blow from Toranaga in, or at least the head decapitating blow in the
for good reason, as it turns out.
For good reason, as it turns out, yeah. But yeah, Mizoguchi also says, perhaps presciently, it was fate that forced me into declaring an unwinnable war, and then later says, maybe we'll meet in the afterlife. Maybe the one holding the sword will be me. So, a lot to think about. Flash forward to present day. We're with Toranaga and his forces, and Toranaga meets up with his half-brother, Lord Saeki, to get his help with Operation Crimson Sky. We also learn that if he can't get Lord Seki's help, they are pretty screwed. They will be doomed. So they decide to hang out for the night before figuring out what their Crimson Sky plans will be. Patrick Klepek, it's time for Dave Chen to voice his annoyance at a common trope in movies and television. Two people meet up for the first time in a long time, and one of them says something really kind of provocative and angering to another person. There's a tense moment in the air before, get over here. We're all just joking here. To be fair, this novel was written decades ago, and so this might have been one of the first instances that this ever happened, that trope ever happened. Patrick Klepek, what do you think? Is that still charming to you when two people meet up and they say, well, I never thought you'd look this ugly. And it's like, get over, come on, bring it in for a hug, buddy. You know, what do you think?
I think part of the I'm with you on the trope being well worn and worn out, but I do think maybe some of this happens later in the episode, but there's at least some groundwork laid ahead of this that Toranaga does not care for his brother. Really, we don't have a great sense of the familial dynamics, but this isn't a meeting he's looking forward to, and so I think that adds a different layer to that interaction because there is such a performative part from Toranaga, which is like, my brother, let us drink. And you can kind of get the sense the entire time he is biting his tongue. I think he calls him like a half mongrel, like later in the episode to somebody else. And so this is like, I think that added at least a little texture to the exchange, but I'm with you as a storytelling device that is pretty worn out.
Fair enough. Toranaga and Mariko meet up. They discuss Lady Kiku's fees because Toranaga wants to hire Lady Kiku for Lord Saeki. And Mariko says it can be reduced with a stick of Toranaga's time, which we later learn is like a literal stick that burns down.
Just like a match.
It's because they don't have clocks back then, so you got to light a stick on fire and wait for it to burn to nothing. That's how you measure time. Blackthorn shows up, wants to know what his role is in the battles to come in Crimson Sky. Toranaga hasn't decided anything, and that is a very unsatisfying answer for Blackthorn. Fuji makes dinner for Lord Saeki, and everyone gathers together that night to just hang out a bit before they talk shop the next day. The food looks pretty freaking good, I have to say. I don't know if you had an opinion on that, but
every time we saw a shot of the fish, I was excited.
There continues to be tension between Buntaro, Blackthorn, and Mariko, but Lord Saeki starts telling stories about Toranaga, about how he cut off Mizoguchi's head with a single blow, and how Toranaga was once sent away as a hostage to ensure an alliance with the Imatani clan, but he was so scared that he shat his pants. That story makes it super tense and awkward. People are not happy he told that story. But Lord Saeki does ask Toranaga's son, what do you prefer, stories, legends, or the truth? Good question for this whole episode. Anyway, before we later learned, by the way, that Hiromatsu and Toranaga talk about how it took 9 separate blows for him to cut Mizoguchi's head off. Pretty ugly stuff.
Well, and in that exchange, and again, it's an episode that is giving us a slightly better sense of the interiority of Toranaga. He chuckles, like they are having a private moment that is not in front of other people. Like these are clearly lifelong friends that have honest emotional reactions to one another. And so the fact that they laugh over his inability and like make fun of the guy for, why would you pick a 12-year-old to be your second? Like, you stupendous dumbass. That's more honest humor and emotional introspection that we get from characters like that. Because so much of the show is about performance, honor. Like, it is how you act in other people because this is how you act. And it's so rare that we actually just get somebody like these characters specifically acting their true honest selves. And you get like a brief bit of that. That's why I really loved that little exchange, because this is not a show that's going to give us tons of flashbacks to these two characters, like building up to like, how can these characters act this way with one another? Like, what happened in the past? We don't get that. We get this moment and then infer backwards. Wow. Like, their ability to have that conversation tells us so much about the history of those two in a way that it was just really smart and enjoyable.
Before Toranaga can make Lord Saeki an offer about why he's going to benefit from having an alliance with him, it turns out Saeki has already received another offer. Dun dun dun! Massive twist. He is the 5th regent.
Did you see this coming? This got me.
I will say it got me as well. I didn't know that it would happen because we'd seen them trying to recruit that other dude for the regent in the other episode, and basically Ishido seems like pretty ineffective, but I guess that Lady Ochiba got her fingers in on this.
Yeah, he lit a fire under his ass after making fun of him. Because I was like, oh, this in a show that is not really about twists, to make this felt like a really good one, well earned, and like got me to slow clap the show a little bit. I was like, all right, I didn't see that one coming.
It's a great betrayal scene, very tense, and you're kind of wondering. And I gasped, and it's kind of like some of those classic scenes in the Red Wedding in Game of Thrones or something of that nature, where it's like, oh, he was betraying you the whole time. You didn't even know it. Of course, less killing happens at the end of this one because that's not the honorable way to do it in this time period in Japan. So, anyway. Lord Saeki has betrayed Toranaga, and his men have blocked all the roads outside of the city. He says, by the order of Council of Regents, we invite Toranaga to submit before us in Osaka and answer for his treachery. He is to deliver his response to Lord Saeki, our ambassador and newly appointed regent. There's this funny moment when Lord Saeki hands Toranaga's son an order to commit seppuku because of how he killed the Josen guy from the other episode. And Toranaga's son is about to take the piece of paper, and Toranaga's like, don't take that. It was very funny because it's like, this kid is just, he's like Kendall Roy or maybe even Roman. Like, he's just.
It's this is not, the show has humor, but it doesn't have kind of outright clowns that you get to laugh at. And Toranaga's son is the closest we get to.
I don't know about that. I don't know that I laugh that much. He's a very tragic figure. He's a very tragic figure, obviously in this episode too. But that moment was very funny when he's like, don't take the order affirming your execution. Basic 101 stuff. Come on, kid. Very funny. Anyway, Toranaga has until end of day tomorrow to figure all this out, which I thought was very considerate, he got the email that's like, hey, please decide whether you're going to surrender by EOD, adds a lot of variables to the situation as opposed to just like, hey, let's go now. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, you're giving Mr. Toranaga too much time to come up with a really clever plan to get out of this sticky situation. Or not.
I guess the rationale is, if Toranaga goes peacefully, that's like to everyone's benefit, right? As opposed to if you just like betrayed him right now and we're fighting, like it might end up in this huge battle. It's still a matter of
honor, right? Like a moment to settle your affairs. It's obviously very important for people to write things like wills. This is something that there is constantly brought up throughout the show, and so I think it's more like, hey, I'm betraying my brother, get the fuck out, but also like here's 24 hours to. I mean, the way he's got the encampment surrounded, I understand a little bit of ego there. Like, what are you possibly going to do in the next 24 hours? So go settle your affairs of your life, and then we'll move on.
There's a bunch of scenes of the people talking about what's going to happen with Toranaga, predicting things. We'll get into some of those a little bit later, but there is one critical scene of Omi and Nagakado. So that's Yabushige's nephew and Toranaga's son. They're chilling in a hot spring and they're scheming. And Lord Saeki overhears their scheming. And, Omi really wants to get on the fight, Patrick Klepek. He's really raring to go. And he predicts that his death will be a beautiful one. But Lord Saeki explains death is just a lonely path in the woods, actually. And you don't know anything, kid. There's a quick scene when Blackthorn and Yabushige are looking out at ships in the harbor, and Yabushige basically starts fighting Blackthorn, I should say, and kind of training him a little bit. Hold your sword like this, pick it up like that. Buntaro steps in and almost kills Blackthorn right then and there. Later, Toranaga is dictating his will when Buntaro shows up, and he wants permission to kill Blackthorn before all this stuff goes down. And the reason why is because he's not a fan of the way Blackthorn has been interacting with Mariko. But Toranaga says, hey, I hate to tell you this, but if you have cause to kill Blackthorn, you also have cause to kill your wife. And asks Mariko, "What do you think of this?" And she's like, "Yeah, that's fine with me."
That's what I've been asking for the whole
I'm
time.
cool.
Like, had my hand up.
Yeah,
death,
cool.
please.
we cool with that. That would be great. I'm 100% on board with that plan. Buntaro is unable to condemn his wife to death because it turns out the real Shogun was love, Patrick Klepek.
Buntaro is such an interesting character in that regard because his sadness in this moment from an emasculation, which is like, I'm unable to make this person feel this way. Is it humiliation? Is it there is an actual affection he has from Mariko, like that clearly has never been resolved or built upon in the entirety of the relationship? It's a kind of fascinating moment where, for all his anger and rage, and Mariko is not blameless in this situation. Even if for a period she thought her husband was dead, she has certainly carried herself in front of the engine in ways that are often inappropriate relative to the role she has been assigned.
I don't know if I even agree with that. I think she, in public, she's been completely above board.
Well, I guess she invites some criticism with some of the things that have happened along the way. Relative to the expectations of the society, I'm not trying to defend women as property in ancient Japan.
I will put it this way: she has not been maximally emotionally detached in her interactions with Blackthorn. That's the most I'd be willing to say. But anyway, I don't know, Patrick Klepek, haven't you ever had anyone in your life who you love but also want to see die to some degree? I'm sure we've all been there.
I can't reveal that list. I've revealed so many crimes on this show, David, but I'm not adding my would-be death list to that one yet. It's too soon.
We've all been there. We've all been there where we love someone deeply and also we'd be okay with them dying. It's true for everyone. It's true for everyone.
For subscribers of Decoding TV, we'll be on a bonus episode. We'll be running down those lists very soon. Tune in.
So Buntaro refuses to condemn his wife to death and leaves, and it's actually kind of embarrassing because you just wasted Toranaga's time, okay? But but Toranaga asks Mariko to repledge her allegiance, and Mariko basically says, "My life sucks, please let my life end." Toranaga is not a fan of that plan. And
deeply annoyed.
Toranaga ultimately agrees to submit to the will of the council. Crimson Sky was a mistake. So they gather all the Lord Seki's men and Toranaga's men in this huge scene where they all come together and Toranaga surrenders. At that point, Blackthorn stands up and tells off Toranaga. He is pissed because the Western way of doing things is you fight to the death, basically, right? And so why would you surrender? That doesn't make any sense to Blackthorn. Lord Seki does deliver this brutal line: "You have nowhere left to go and nothing left to be," which is what my mom said to me when I moved in with her in my 20s, so it's really...
some people put up a string of letters that say happy birthday. David's mom put up this really long message condemning his life choices.
Yeah. Flashback. Anyway, Toranaga agrees to surrender. It's very sad. But maybe he's got an ace up his sleeve because later that night, Lord Seki is having sex with Lady Kiku when all of a sudden Toranaga's son, Nagakado, charges in with some reinforcements, kills a bunch of dudes, and he is about to deliver the killing blow to Lord Seki when he accidentally slips on a rock, cracks his head open, and dies. Patrick Klepek, what's your reaction to that?
Well, there's actually a really amazing line that happens after he slips and cracks his skull. I think the line that he says there as the son is dying is like, where's the beauty in this?
Yes.
And I thought that was a really fascinating encapsulation of the events that just unfolded and the different ways that this show views death, and the way that we as an audience member interpret some of these perhaps archaic or at least different ways of interpreting what it means to die, when you die, how you die, and how it's portrayed in the show. And I thought for that character to deliver that line in the context of how this death played out was really powerful.
I agree. The whole episode, Nagakado has these ideas of what it means to go into battle. Toranaga even calls him out on it. He says, "Why is it the people who've never been to battle are the ones most eager to go into it?" He has these grand ideas of what killing is, and there's this funny line about I heard it's like it's even more like your first kill in battle is even more intense than your first woman, and Yabushige says depends on the woman, which is funny. But he has all these grand ideas, and what we learn is that the actual story behind it is often less sexy, less interesting, and often more tragic than the legend, right? Toranaga was this great warlord boy who defeated Mizoguchi. Actually, he had to swing his sword 9 times before Mizoguchi died. Oh, I am Nagakado. I'm going to go into battle and gloriously defeat my enemies. Actually, I'm going to slip on a rock and bonk my head and bleed out, you know?
Ugh.
There is this huge difference between what we think of ourselves, what we think of the legend, and what actually happened, and that's really what this episode tries to illustrate. So, beautiful ending. It does this ending, Patrick Klepek, where the credits start rolling, but you still hear the rain go for the whole credits.
Ugh.
Love that.
Well,
Love
and that specific, I don't know about you, but that specific way of dying is like one of my,
Really.
like I think about it. It like was crystallized after the was it the Alfonso Cuarón movie Roma from 2018, where like the father brief spoilers for the movie Roma from 2018, but like they're on the beach with like his kids, and like he just like weirdly randomly slips on a rock and just like eats it. Like I think about that kind of death constantly when I'm like out with my kids. Like, look, lots of ways to die, all of them potentially sad, but man, that one would suck real bad. Like real, that's like highly embarrassing. And also, I don't know. I just think about whenever those are depicted in film, the sort of like slip and crack the back of your head, those sit with me so much more than more grotesquely, depicted ways of dying.
I'm gonna say seems like a pretty good way to go to me. You know,
well, sure. In like
you could be Mizoguchi asking Toranaga to be your second. That's another way to die.
Yes, I think it's more. It's one of those deaths that makes me so uncomfortable as the viewer, but as the participant, as the experiencer of the death, probably pretty straightforward. Like even as you're going through the process of dying, like you're probably not that aware of your pain receptors. Probably aren't going off too much at that point. As you're
probably in shock. You're probably in shock. It's not a bad way to go. All right. Anyway, there's a few other scenes that are worth mentioning. There is a brief scene with Hiromatsu who visits Fuji and provides the remains of Fuji's family. And Fuji says once her job is done, she's going to kill herself. And Hiromatsu says, why not enjoy life after the victory has occurred? And Fuji's doubtful that there will be a victory.
Fuji, I think you're right.
Fuji's one of the smartest people on the show, I think.
Yeah.
She knows what's up.
Ahead of the curve.
The lady in charge of the brothel, in charge of the Willow World, she asks for a stick of Toranaga's time in order to try to secure a place in Edo, the future city that's being built, where she can create a guild for courtesans. So that courtesans can age and grow old with dignity. Perhaps a district, one might say, that is illuminated by red lights. You could argue. According to Wikipedia, there are red light districts in Edo, present-day Tokyo, Japan. Established in 1617, one of them, Yoshiwara, was one of 3 licensed and well-known red light districts created during the early 17th century by the Tokugawa shogunates. So, end quote. So this is something that does have precedence in reality. And yeah, a really interesting conversation. It felt kind of random to me, but I think it does feed into this idea of how much time do we have left on this world? Like a stick of time. I don't have that many sticks left of time. And he's just not a nice man. Okay. He's kind of like
not sentimental, right?
He's like, hey, thanks for this distraction from my impending doom. Really appreciate that. I know you poured your heart out for this and gave up a lot to have this meeting happen, but I have a lot of other ththings on my mind right now.
And she accidentally insults him. Like, wow, why would you leave the town? So, it could be taken over at any moment. Like, why so insecure? Yeah, I'm aware.
I thought it was gonna be this scene where he's like, "Hey, give this knife to Lady Kiku," and
that was.
I thought they were gonna like plan to assassinate Lord Saeki, but It didn't do that. The show didn't do that. So it left me wondering, like what was the takeaway from this? It was not. I doubt it was a plot related reason, because it's basically the language of the scene is Toranaga is going to take this so personally. He's going to do something to react to the situation. But that, as far as we know, that doesn't happen. I don't think Toranaga sent Nagakado in there to kill Lord Saeki, right?
And I also don't think, or actually rather, I hope that one of the reveals in the episodes to come is that he has been playing everyone for fools. This has all been a grand scheme, and he has a plot behind the scenes. I think so much
it's still
of this,
possible. Still possible.
It's possible. It would seem odd against everything that this episode is built around, which is that it's not to say he isn't smart or cunning or strategic or a great tactician, but these great men, or how they are thought of, have their limits. And I mean, Toranaga, like, the quake fucked him, right? Basically a random act of random violence by the environment essentially tore the rug out of him. And what's he kind of shrugs at it and goes, there aren't cards left to play. Now, I'm sure the end of this will be more complicated than that, but my suspicion is that it will not be as simple as he just hasn't told anyone what his master plan is, and then there will be some just a piece to pull out that suddenly makes everything fall into place. I mean, we'll see, but this episode doesn't point in that direction, at least for my personal interpretation of it.
Only other scene I think worth mentioning perhaps is Nagakado and Lady Fuji have a conversation about her dead husband, and you also see Lady Fuji. She's got some moves, man. She's got some moves. She can probably take some dudes down if necessary, and maybe that time will come. So the only other observation I want to make about this episode before we wrap up here is I appreciate how little of the show revolves around Blackthorn. Like we've talked about white savior narratives and how the show does fall into some of those pitfalls, but I was looking for a clip, some clips for the episode to play during this podcast, and there's only 6 lines in English in this entire episode. Basically, there's so few lines, but all of them are basically in the promo for the episode. It's really. It's really wild how Blackthorn's story is really the show opens with Blackthorn, right? Like he is one of the first characters we meet, if I recall correctly. But he has really become sidelined as the show goes on. Rightfully so. He has one of the least interesting arcs right now. It may become more interesting later, but I appreciate that the show is willing to spend more time where the more interesting things are, as opposed to just with the white dude.
Or shoehorning him into scenes as a way of how is the audience gonna have an emotional connection to the scene unless there's Blackthorn here to act as like a surrogate. And the show
vanishes for vast portions of the show. Basically,
the show resists it. I'm sure he will yes, show. Multiple times now you've had Blackthorn go just give me my ship. This ship could do something. And there's even a scene in this episode where he's like, that ship. It's got it. I get it, show. The ship is going to play an important role in the next couple of episodes. I hear you loud. I've not forgotten that he was a ship captain and a sailor. And I feel like they just keep reminding the audience that he has a role to play. But you're right that I'm glad that even if the show sometimes is kind of finding ways to remind you that he still has important elements on the table to contribute to sort of the end game, that when he's not important to what is important to the characters, he's off to the side. And when he's important to the plot, he'll be important to the plot and he'll be present. In some ways, David, we don't have screeners for this. We can't watch ahead.
We tried to get screeners. We were denied.
We'll get their effects. But I will say, because I do always beat this drum of I like weekly drops. This show, I love how tied into knots I get the closer I get to the drop of the new episode, because otherwise it would be the kind of show where you and I would get off this call and be like, well, time to go shotgun that new episode of Shogun. And
it's nice to have something to look forward to in life, Patrick.
And I really do look forward to the episode coming out, and that is that's rare of a lot of television or media in general. And so it's exciting to have that to look forward to every Monday or Tuesday.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.